This year's fire season in Canada has been the worst on record. For the thousands of firefighters that battled the flames, the danger doesn't stop when the fires go out. Many end up suffering long-term health effects. And the CBC's Katie Nicholson joins us now with more. And so, Katie, you've been looking into the issue of compensation for these firefighters. What have you learned?
Well, I apologize for that little bang there. This is this is what one firefighter family had to go through to try and get compensation for a condition that, had they not been a wildfire fighter, they would have automatically gotten here in Ontario.
Unbelievable.
So just so we understand, in the world of firefighting in Canada, if you develop one of a list of cancers or in some cases a cardiovascular issue, it's a presumed condition. So there's legislation in place in provinces and territories that it will be automatically presumed that your illness has been caused as a part of your, or because of your job, right, as a firefighter. So it's designed really to just make that process smooth so that you can easily get, or at least more easily, access the type of supports and workers' compensation that you might need in those instances. However, in all but 5 jurisdictions in Canada, the legislation has specifically excluded wildfire fighters from those presumed conditions, even though they are presenting with a lot of the same illnesses as structural firefighters. So these binders here belong to one man named Tom LeBlanc. Now, he was a wildfire fighter here in Ontario for 35 years. And back in 2009, he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is it's a very common cancer among firefighters. He and his wife took a look at the legislation, and they decided that they were going to still try to make a case to the Workers' Compensation Board that he should get compensation for this. He passed away in 2010. They had already been rejected once. On his deathbed, he asked his wife, Kim, to keep pushing and to see if they could secure coverage. And she did. Kim talked to me about all of the times that he would come home with soot running out of his pores, just the way he would describe what happened out in the bush, sleeping next to the fires, breathing in that smoke day in, day out, weeks at a time. Here's Kim LeBlanc.
Heavens to Betsy, if the guy's got that cancer, then you need to own up. It's so traumatic for families to lose somebody, period, the end, but to lose somebody when it's possibly could have been prevented, and then the people responsible aren't even willing to look at it or take some level of responsibility for it. It's heartbreaking. And you know, some former wildfire fighters say they don't even know where to go. Kim LeBlanc, it took about 9 years, and she was finally successful. Finally, the WSIB agreed that it was probable that her husband's exposure to smoke and chemicals was a likely cause of the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But I spoke to another firefighter. He had been out there for 20 years, and then he started to have difficulty breathing. He couldn't pass the test, the physical every year. And then years later, he developed a kidney cancer. He lost one of his kidneys. And a day I was supposed to interview him, actually this summer, he had a heart attack. And then he finally recuperated. I interviewed him just last week. Here's a little of Simon Chateauvert and just sort of the struggle he's had.
You're breathing smoke and ash constantly. You can be out in fires for weeks sometimes. So you do breathe a lot of smoke and eat a lot of ash. Well, some answers would be nice. You know, is this because of, you know, is my missing a kidney because of the firefighting and you know, whatever.
So both Simon and Kim LeBlanc would really like to see wildfire fighters brought into the legislation in this province, and there are numerous other provinces where, again, they are not included in that presumed legislation.
So why not? Why aren't they covered, and why all this awful paperwork?
It's really hard to get a handle on it, but you have to realize that this for years has been a seasonal job. It's been something that people have done on a short-term basis, and it's perhaps not been as organized as you know. Municipal firefighters are very well organized with strong union base behind them. But also the research has been a little bit behind for forest firefighters. It's really well known that firefighters, structural firefighters, have a much higher risk of cancer, that they're exposed exposed to treated lumber, all kinds of materials. And there has always been this presumption that somehow wildfire smoke was more wholesome, was less risky. And of course, the science is not bearing that out. So as the science is changing, we're seeing legislation change in a number of different jurisdictions. Dr. T. Gadati, he's one of the foremost experts in this field, looking at what the effects of wildfire fighting and structural firefighting are on the health of firefighters. Here's his take on how that's changing for wildfire fighters.
The presumption has always been that that structural firefighters are at greater risk. That may or may not be true, but it doesn't mean that wildland firefighters aren't at increased risk as well. And increasingly, wildland firefighting means firefighting at the wildland-urban interface. So you're dealing with burning structures that are adjacent or surrounded by wildlands, in addition to the wildland fires themselves.
So right now in this country, it's only BC, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, and Manitoba, which have in the legislation that wildfire fighters can or are sort of a part of this presumed, sort of under the presumptions. They're covered by that. But everywhere else, including Alberta, where we had incredible wildfires, those wildfire fighters are not covered by this presumed legislation. So it's sort of an ongoing issue. We've talked to the International Association of Firefighters, and their take on this, Andrew, is that a fire is a fire is a fire, and it doesn't matter who the firefighter is, what type of fire they're fighting. They're putting themselves at risk, and they should get this type of coverage.
Important story. Katie, thank you. The CBC's Katie Nicholson.